Hi, this is Terry Gilliam. Time Bandits was a film that the idea came from an idea I had over a weekend because it was the result of frustration of trying to get Brazil off the ground for years, and nobody was interested in Brazil. And so one day, out of frustration, I said, let's make a film for all the family. And one weekend, all this stuff poured out. And the original image, the first image I had was of the horse coming through the wardrobe. And then I thought, oh, that's good. And let's make a film from a child's point of view, so the camera's always low. And I thought, well, the problem with that is the idea of one kid trying to hold the whole film together would be difficult. So let's surround him with a gang of people of a similar size. And so we ended up with a group of dwarfs around him. And once, horses coming out of wardrobes and a gang of dwarfs and a kid came together, the film followed very quickly on. It was easy. What I liked about the idea was that the time and space was imperfect, that God is imperfect. His work is not what it's cracked up to be. And if there are holes in time and space, what would be better than to rob in one century and then escape 100 years before the crime is even committed? And the idea of these little helpers, God's little helpers, setting out on a life of crime because it was far more interesting and rewarding than working in heaven was another crucial element in this whole process. Many of my films have TVs as central characters in them and opening characters. The TV dominates our life, and what always intrigued me was the most valuable object in the world turned out to be, a kitchen. It's the pettiness of people's dreams is what we're really dealing with here. Kevin reads. Kevin's literate. In books he discovers, history and heroes and fantastical things. His parents are typical, close-minded materialists whose highest hope is to have a nicer kitchen or a new mix master. It's been interesting because I find a lot of modern kids don't read, so I don't know where they're getting their myths from, for their ideas from. They're getting them from television and movies, which are very limited compared to what books have to offer. And all this was important to me when we were making this. Our wardrobe with the horse coming out was difficult to do because horses don't, being sensible animals, like jumping into black spaces where they don't know where they're going to land. So it took us weeks of training to get the horse to go into a black hole. We then had to build a wardrobe that was oversized to incorporate him, and then we shot it. It was quite extraordinary hearing this horse coming down the studio, not being able to see him, and then wham, out of the wardrobe he burst. I hate kids' films. I hate kid actors. They're all too cute, especially American ones. And it was important to have a kid who was a real kid, who was interested in the things kids are, but had all the faults that kids have as well. When we were casting the film, the casting lady, Irene Lamb, came up with a lot of different suggestions, and there was one particular kid that she thought was going to be the one. And he came in, and he was very bright and perky, and he brought his brother along, who was very quiet and somehow contained and reserved and seemed to had a quality that intrigued me because he wasn't trying to be clever and cute and a typical kid actor. And that's who we chose. So Craig's brother has probably made his life a misery ever since.
My name's Craig Warnock, and I played the character of Kevin, and I'm going to just talk about the vague memories I've got about some things, but I remember some things better than others. But all good memories, though, apart from what's-his-face. Originally, I did a poetry reading for my school with my brother when I was, I guess, 7 or 8. And an agent saw us both there, and I think she, thought a package deal and signed us up to her small agency. And then I guess Time Bandits was a big film to get, well, it was a big film to get that year for kids. But obviously the perspective then is so different that I can't, it was exciting that, but I didn't really take it all in. I remember the phone call coming through and saying, "Oh, you've got it." It's like, "Oh, great, great."
The family was to me the kind of family that, not that I grew up with, but were surrounding me in America, who were total materialists. Things were what mattered. That's why we covered their sofas with plastic. I remember growing up with that, where the seats in a car or the sofas were always covered with plastic to preserve them for what I do not know, possibly for resale, but I doubt it. It's really, the religion of materialism. And they watch game shows where people are humiliated and are put through the most awful things in the hopes that they will get a little bit more in the way of money and goodies. The plastic then followed through, so that when we get to evil, again, his assistants are covered with plastic. It became a metaphor for all that was wrong with the modern material world. Well, interestingly enough, the kid's the oldest person in his family, and obviously the wisest.
The best thing about this scene is what everyone misses. And when I watched it again recently, I saw something else which I'd never seen before, which was the theatre that becomes Napoleon's theatre. And for me, to see something new is quite astounding, really. And all the toys on the floor and the checkered chessboard set, and the knights and the cowboys on the floor. It's quite brilliant. That's, it all ties in the end. But then Terry's a cartoonist originally, so it was all in his mind. And he was a perfectionist on set, I remember, because it's, he's got it in his mind exactly what he wants, which you need. You need a leader who's got the vision, and everyone else backs it up. And he'll be very specific, the actual set dressing and things.
There was going to be another scene of Kevin in bed before the Time Bandits appeared, and it was going to be the second night, and he was going to be in bed, and the wardrobe was going to burst open, and the bed was going to be floating in water, and pirates were going to come out on a longboat and fire at him. And the next morning he was going to be accused by his parents of having wet the bed. But again, we were short of money and time, so we didn't shoot that scene.
Where are we? I don't know. Well, look at the map. It's not on the map. Is he coming after us? I don't know. I think we gave him a slip. It's him! Run for it!
The very first time I met all the dwarves, they were all lined up in a row, and we were introduced one by one. And that was a funny thing, Again, children have special things about dwarves, don't they? And they're their size, but they're adults. I mean, they're fantasy figures, in many ways, and have been in culture, ever since, really. And I was taller than any of them, which is funny. And yeah, I got to know them as time went on. And out of the six of them, the older one, Vermin, I think, was probably the oldest, or maybe Strutter. And they were maybe quieter. I mean, Dave Rappaport, it was very funny, and Kenny, because he'd been R2-D2, that was like another huge thing to meet R2-D2. It was amazing, without his costume on, obviously, but he'd look silly in this with his R2-D2 costume on.
It was interesting casting the Time Bandits, because there's only a limited number of people who can play characters that are 4 feet high. And we were really lucky to have a great collection. And David Rappaport had been with several different wonderful comedy groups. Ken Campbell is a wild man in England, and I'd first seen David with him. And David used to be a teacher, actually, and very bright. The others, like Kenny Baker is R2-D2. He's been stuck in a tin can for most of his career. And the others, Jack Purvis, Malcolm, Tiny. Actually, Malcolm, Michael, and Jack Purvis again ended up being Ewoks and Wombles. They get stuck inside furry costumes, and nobody ever gets to see who they are. They're never real people. And again, for me, it was a really interesting thing to take these guys who are not normally allowed to be heroes, like like Sylvester Stallone and Bruce Willis, and allow them to be heroes and to treat them and never really comment on their size. They just happen to be smaller heroes than normal. I mean, they're actually closer to the heroes of old in movies. Alan Ladd was a very short person. This was actually very difficult to do the Godhead, because we had all sorts of very complicated ideas in the way we're going to do it. In the end, we just put a big plywood cutout of the head on the end of a long rod and pushed it down the corridor, and the smoke emanating from that covered the dolly that was pushing it. And then later we photographed a guy saying the lines, and I took those pieces of film and then blew them up as individual photographs, and then we re-photographed them and superimposed them on this plywood head. A lot of the stuff is done with little models of the guys, but the models, the figures are only about 6 inches high that we used in a lot of these falling shots. The time holes, again, were quite funny things. I just like the idea of them opening like sliding doors, and we put that little neon edge to make it look more interesting. And it worked a treat, and it cost very little money.
All clear, Wally?
Yeah.
Jim Atchison did these costumes, and they're wonderful. We spent a lot of time on the detail because we wanted to give the impression of these guys having traveled around in time before they got here, and they just scavenged whatever they could. And half the time they don't know what it is they're putting on their bodies, but they obviously, in the case of Fidget, his colander serves as a helmet of some sort.
Og, are you here? Oh, yeah, he's here. Vermin?
Tiny, who plays Vermin, was actually part of the harmonica gang here. There had been harmonica shows, I think in the 40s and 50s in both America and England, where they would have like 6 guys playing harmonicas, and there'd always be the little guy at the end. And Tiny was that man in the English harmonica gang.
So now we're in Napoleonic land. And for the actual, for Kevin, who's been snatched out of his bedroom, this is, out of nowhere, this is still shock, complete shock. This is absolute lunatics in your bedroom cupboard and out through a time hole.
We had to do this entire French sequence on a hillside with 3 hussars, and that was it. And cut out buildings again. I love cutouts. That's just a cutout in the background there. When we shot this, my parents were actually sitting just to the left of camera, and they had to be moved from the shot. They'd come over to watch us make a movie, watch their son be a movie director. And they kept getting into shots. But it was interesting to try to recreate this whole French period very quickly by 3 hussars, a group of escapees with a couple wagons, because there was no money, and so you had to do it with just simple detail. And I love the idea of just throwing this kid immediately, without much, there's no preamble, we're just thrown immediately into these places. And hopefully we create enough of an atmosphere very quickly to give a sense of what's going on. The gang, again, I wanted to make them as violent as possible. They're awful people. We didn't want anybody to be cute and cuddly and lovable in this film. They're greedy little bastards. And that's the way we played them. And I love the fighting within the group all the time, especially between Strutter and Randall. Randall's a know-it-all, but Strutter is clearly the guy who knows better, but doesn't have whatever it is, the ruthlessness to lead. The character that actually came out best was Wally, Jack Purvis, who became a very strong character. This Napoleonic Castiglione, the Battle of Castiglione, was shot in Raglan Castle, which is in Wales, and it's actually a very small place. This is the advantage. It looks big because we got very little leading actors, and so the sets look twice as big. The close-ups of them in the boat on their little raft were actually shot in our studio, which is this tiny room about 20 foot by 20 foot. And we did all this later, and we put them on a little piece on, I think it was a couple old doors on inner tubes, and moved them around. And all these close-up shots were done there after the main shoot, because we'd, as usual, run out of time and money.
This scene was scary because there were underground explosives going off. I'm sure there's a bit cut out, in fact, where I run through the explosives. I definitely remember doing that. So that might have been snipped off. And the fire scene going into the castle was quite magnificent. It was a Welsh castle, all done up at night, and there were stuntmen with fire on their back. And that's exciting to watch on a film, and obviously really exciting to be there. And some of the late shoots, because, again, being a child actor, there's quite strict provisions, and there were plenty of times we went well over those, I'm sure. In fact, Time Bandits was a name given by the crew to the film at the time, I remember.
Hello, this is Michael Palin. I collaborated with Terry in the writing of Time Bandits, wrote myself a part, and I shall be talking about it on this disc. I had acted in Gilliam's first film outside the Python Group, which was Jabberwocky, in 1976. And we just kept regularly in touch. And he lived quite close by. And I knew he was brewing up a children's film, had an idea. I weren't quite sure what it was. And I remember one day, quite distinctly, I think it must have been a weekend, Saturday or Sunday afternoon, arriving with this single piece of paper in my kitchen, which he'd typed up. And it was basically the plot for Time Bandits, about the boy going back in time to search for this, that, and the other. So he said, will you write it with me? And I said, well, or maybe he said, but it was agreed that he should write basically the plot very carefully and very thoroughly, and that what I would do is to come in and just sort of beef up some of the characters. As it happened in the end, I think we both worked on plot, but the general initial idea for the story, the general drive of the story was all from Terry. And where I suppose I came into my own was suggesting historical periods that we could go back to, because I had a degree in history. It was the first time it had ever been any use to me. And also to write the characters, because I think Terry liked the way I wrote characters, whereas he could write a lot of the action and all that. And so that's how we did it. So, I mean, it's really sort of 60% Terry, well, maybe 70%, I don't know, and 30% my stuff.
Mike and I worked, I thought, really well together, because I'm pretty good on form and big ideas and meanness, and he's great on just character and brilliant lines and making it much more enjoyable and pleasurable than I could ever do. And so we balance each other very nicely. I love the idea of, in the middle of a battle or just at the end of the battle, that entertainment is still important. It's the one group that sort of survives. In a way, there's a connection between Time Bandits and Munchausen in that sense. There's a group of actors trying to survive in the middle of a war.
No, they're all freaks. Not one of them under 5'6". What kind of theater are you running, huh?
I'm sorry, sir, but...
No, the more of the funny show, the little puppets hitting each other. That's what I like. Little things hitting each other.
I think a lot of the work on the film was casting was done by thinking of people we'd like to be in it and we'd like to work with. And Ian Holm, his name came up because he's an actor we both admired greatly, and he's universally admired. He's a wonderful actor. And he just had a sort of Napoleonic bearing. I could just see him as Napoleon. And that gave us a very nice, clear character in history and a period in history.
Ian Holm, I'd seen Ian Holm first in Alien. Most people, I think, first was aware of him, on an international level, aware of him in Alien. And he was powerful. And I saw him then in a television show. It was The Misanthrope. It was the television version of the Misanthrope. And he was brilliantly funny. And Ian had always been known for being a very serious, powerful actor and not doing comedy. And I saw him in that, and he was so funny. I thought, that's who we got to get, because he was the right size. He had the incredible intensity and power that you need from Napoleon, and yet the humor. And, I mean, he was astoundingly funny. And this accent he's developed for the part is amazing. I don't know what it is. I think it's Sardinian or something. What was interesting when we were doing this, the guys who do, they do musical acts, some of the Time Bandits in real life, and they were desperate to try to do it properly. And I kept trying to get them to do it badly. And so what you see there is, in many ways, people trying their best to be good and always slightly out of sync. Randall in particular. Tiny is wonderful for slow takes. Because that was something he always did in the harmonica gang. That was the kind of act that he always got involved in. Kenny and Jack are actually a double act. They call themselves the Mini-Tones, and they do a stand-up comedy act. I don't know why, but I've always loved theaters. I love seeing these backstage shots because the whole thing is just a series of little cutout planes. And when you're sitting in the front, you see these magnificent worlds are created, but from the side or the back, there's nothing there. Well, I use wide-angle lenses, and keeping the camera low made the whole thing bigger and more dramatic. I thought it was very important that it's how you see the world. You see the world through children's eyes, and children are only, 3.5, 4 feet tall. And in a strange way, that's the way I've always seen movies. Movies have always seemed huge to me. And when I go to the movies, I still am a kid. And so we set out to do that in this one. We actually cheated here. We put the generals on boxes behind Ian to make them even taller. The point was to just sink him down as low as possible. But he could play Mussolini as well, the intensity. And yet, his little grins are wonderful. Now, this was just basically a stately home we found, and it had all these wonderful paintings on the walls. We had to cram as much stuff in there as possible to make it look like a treasure trove. And Ian, doing this scene, was outrageously funny. So much so that I couldn't stop laughing during the takes. And eventually it was requested that the director please leave the set so he could finish the scene. And I did dutifully walk off and let him do it. Because Ian was brilliant. I couldn't stop laughing. One thing that was interesting about this, the scene was probably twice as long, and it was painful to try to cut it because Ian is such a fine actor. He made the whole thing work. And yet it was too long, and we had to trim it down. I was always worried about dealing with Ian's performances because they were so delicate and so perfect that I felt anything we did in editing would only weaken them. So it was hard work. The problem, we were carried away. Once we got into this section with Napoleon, there were so many good things to do. It was so rich, and it was probably the whole section from the beginning to the end was probably twice as long as what we finally ended up with. The stage play was longer. There was much more going on. There was whole scenes backstage with the puppeteer and the stage manager. This scene. The table was, again, much longer because there were a lot more short people in history to list. And we just had to trim it down. I think we also shot this fairly early on in the shoot, so I was getting carried away. I mean, I was doing a period film here. And, this film was a chance for me to do lots of period films. And so each one was a different kind of period film.
The tapestry. That's 16th century. Nice, isn't it? Get it!
again, what I liked was the guys had never been asked to do such physical work before, and they're really strong, and there was nothing that we would suggest to them that they wouldn't try. In fact, if there was a problem, it was that they would overextend themselves and wanted to be careful, because they were great. I love this with Strutter going through there, and again, the scale of things is what's so funny in this film, and you don't see that in many films. You don't get that chance to put very small people against very tall people and stretch. But in a sense, it was like, it's like making cartoons for me, because the guys, their proportions are such, large heads, small bodies. That's the way I draw cartoons. So they were meant to work in my films. They were the first people that fitted my storyboards.
But there's a real nice bit coming up here when I look up his sleeve. And I can't remember if that was my idea or Terry's, or he said it, but I remember we talked about it. And looking back, it is just such a kid thing to do. Just to go up, they've just unscrewed the man's gold hand, and you just peek up his sleeve, just have a look, see if there's bones sticking out, and that is exactly what a kid would do. I mean, that's.
What I like is we set out to do these things as beautifully as you would do any Visconti film. The costumes are as good as anything the Italians ever did. But it's a comedy, and and I think for the crew, the design crew, it was amazing because they had to do so many different kinds of periods.
Stop! Go! Thieves! After them!
The time holes, I don't remember anything about. I remember doing some jumping, so I can't remember if there were special blue painted boards or anything like that.
The time doors are tricky because you've got to get people jumping in, and basically we just had pieces of black velvet set at the right angle, and they jumped, and then later we would extend those and make them work. And it was always about timing, and there was little jump cuts to do. Now this scene, I actually injured Shelley Duvall in this scene because the coach, which is on the stage and was being wiggled around, I was showing how the gang would drop in from above. And being the kind of director that leads from the front, I threw myself in through the top of the coach to show how they would fall in and miss Shelley. Unfortunately, that headpiece she's got on has got those great horns, and I caught it, and I almost broke her neck. I could hear her neck, all those vertebrae, which I think she's got about 10 more than most people have in their necks. All went, and oh no, the director has just broken the neck of the star. That's what's dangerous when I direct, because I actually take up a lot more space than those guys did as well. On the other hand, when they did their jump, nobody got hurt because we had prepared it. Shelley's neck was already broken. Again, getting Shelley and people like that to play small parts was very nice because she was a friend, met her through Eric Idle. We meet all of our famous friends through Eric Idle. And Shelley was always a wonderful, and odd, and peculiar performer, and a great sense of comedy. So we dragged her over to England.
She's rather frail, Shelley, or appeared to be, and she was always in these incredibly sort of uncomfortable situations, being hit by falling Time Bandits and all that. And she also had a very good comic, sort of approach to it. It was a bit like sort of a cartoon story, a lot of this. And she hit just the right note. Yes, I quite enjoyed I thought the Time Bandits were a great creation of Terry's. I can't remember what their names were, Randall, Strutter, Og. I just came up with those names one day, and sort of just half a minute, there all seemed to be some strange rhythm to the names.
But I thought you were international criminals. Going to be. Yeah, going to be. Aren't we? Going to be. Yeah. Especially now we've got you, Kevin.
God, I hope I'm not that goofy anymore. I think my face has kind of grown around my teeth. People listening will just have to take my word for that. Because each of the dwarves does have a very specific character and a specific name. And Even though, you know, Vermin says just maybe a couple of lines in the whole thing, really. But he's quite, you know, he's very specific. Everyone knows what his name is, what he does, which is eat anything. And they're all given identity like that, which is really nice. Even though they're not all talking all the time.
Good and evil, men and women, night and day, and we did trees and shrubs. We helped make all this.
Phew, that's not bad.
Yeah, but did we get a thimble full of credit for it?
I love Craig in all of this because it's wonderful enthusiasm. I mean, really, you really believe it. He can't believe he's with these guys. These are the most fantastic people he's ever met or even dreamed about. And he's smarter than them, but they're much more surprising than he could ever imagine. That's what I like about them, is that they're constantly surprising. You don't know what they're going to do next. And again, it's a kid's world where the bad guys are really bad. They're awful. And, you know, they snot dribbling down their nose. They pick their nose. They fart. They just, you know, they're awful. And it really frees you up being able to work like that. We don't have to deal with reality. We don't have to deal with real acting, real characterizations. They're all extreme characters. It's all a gigantic cartoon. And there's an interesting situation with them because they're, you know, interesting, cute looking, funny looking because of the things they're wearing and the way they are. That makes it easier to deal with the fact that they're awful. And if they weren't like that, if the costumes weren't like that, if the guys weren't small like that, you would just think these are awful people and I don't want to deal with them. But somehow this way the combination becomes very charming.
Now here in this is again sort of the ordeals that Shelley and I had to undergo. Shelley particularly, I didn't particularly mind, but this was supposed to be a wet day in Epping Forest, and it was actually rather a dry day. So when it came to a later moment in this scene, we were actually sort of doused by the fire brigade. My problem, he has a problem, I don't know. This was all written very much at the last minute.
I love the moment of them just, you think they're going to rescue them, they just rush past them. I mean, these are heartless people, the Time Bandits.
Michael Palin and Shelley Duvall, which is brilliant, and then it's echoed exactly on the Titanic later. And he's got a problem here that's never defined. And again, you know, for a kid, and I remember asking my mother or something, well, what is his problem? Really, and a kid just wouldn't figure it out, but they'd think there was something adult going on, you know. And yet, Kevin all along always knows, he knows exactly where they are now, and he is kind of leader of the gang in many ways, which is funny.
That was a painful shot, I think. Keeping people hung up and upside down for that time is really rough, and because they're shorter, the blood rushing to the head gets there quicker. If you're 6 foot, it takes quite a while for the blood to get from your feet to your brain. These guys, like that.
Steal a cup out of beggars' hands?
Rather.
The teeth from blind old ladies?
Of course.
Toys from...
And again, I hadn't seen scenes shot like this where people have face-offs, one of them upside down, the other. Now, Derek O'Connor, who plays the thug here, it was very interesting because he had real lines. He says them, this is the only time you actually hear him speaking real English. The rest of the time, he doesn't because he gave up his lines. He decided it was funnier just to speak totally ununderstandable way of speaking, so that the other character who plays Marion, Maid Marion, has to translate. Now, because he originally didn't have any lines. And this is what I enjoy, when you get good actors together. They come up with things like that. And then the trick is to use it. Again, this is, you know, Charles' fantasy world of bad guys, arms being ripped off in arm wrestling, and you can do it because it's not real. It's above reality. It's hyper real. It's and the violence, and you know, it's reduced to spitting and kicking, and then I find it interesting how both kids and adults like this film, because on one hand, there are very smart ideas in it that adults can go with, and kids like it just because it's what it is. And it is, in a strange way, a chance to be a kid again without all the mawkish, sentimental crap that normally comes with kids' films. because we hopefully are never speaking down to anybody. When we made it, I remember I said, we're making a film that's intelligent enough for children and exciting enough for adults. I thought that was going to be the line on the posters, actually. John as Robin, interestingly enough, was originally supposed to be Mike as Robin. But when we got John involved, Mike bowed out and took all the other parts because John was perfect for the thing. He always reminds me with that hat, because again, we made everything like a cartoon. It was bigger, longer, and he's like those dunking birds that you put on against a glass of water. They bob down, and that's what it always looked like to me with John. Interestingly enough here, the guys weren't short enough and John wasn't tall enough, so they're all sitting down. They're not standing for this shot. We get very perverse in these kinds of films.
The Robin Hood scene is something I'm enormously fond of, but of course what's strange about it is that I was only there for a day and a half. I don't know how many weeks or months the shooting was, and when you just come in and out, you don't have time to get a very strong sense of the movie. I enjoyed the scene, and I particularly enjoyed working with the two villains who were punching the people behind me. I liked them very much. But it was in and out very, very quickly. It was very well organized. I remember arriving in a beard and having to shave it off in the cold water. That was the only stuff available at 7:30 in the morning. But everything else about that day and the half day following it, I enjoyed. I thought it was a very good scene. Terry Gilliam and Michael let me rewrite it a little bit. And the real reason that I wanted to do it is that when I read the pages, the first thing it said is Robin Hood brackets to be played like the Duke of Kent. And I suddenly saw this as one of those occasions when a member of the royal family, for no reason whatsoever, goes out on cup final day and walks down the line shaking hands with these footballers who are just about to play the most important football match in their life. And some fucking duke is there smiling and wishing them luck. And you want to think, what is the point of this absurd bit of medieval pageant? Get out of there. If you want to watch the match, good luck to you, Your Grace. But stop holding up 100,000 people and millions on television so that an obscure member of the royal family can shake hands with the participants. You have nothing to do with this. And once I got this feeling about it, and that extraordinary sort of, yes, are you enjoy, how long have you been playing right back? And yes, can you kick with your left foot at all, I wonder? And all this kind of crap that goes on in those meaningless conversations. And the whole idea of portraying Robin Hood as the Duke of Kent just appealed to me enormously. And when I say that, I don't really know a great deal about the Duke of Kent. I'm talking about the Duke of Anywhere at all.
Thank you very, 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 very much. Awful people.
Again, these characters that Mike and Shelley play are just doomed throughout history. No matter what happens, they're going to be the losers in history's great plan. These scenes are awful. I mean, when you're pouring down rain and mud and it's cold, and I think we actually achieved that on film. It looks that way. It just looks unpleasant. Again, what's nice, because the scale of people and these roots, it's like, it's like illustrations, like it's Grimm's fairy tales. It's the way we remembered illustrations in kids' books where, the people would be lost in the wood and the trees were twice as big as they ought to be. And that's the way we always do it. Evil now, we were a bit influenced by Alien at this point, because Alien had come out with all the KY jelly and the dripping stuff everywhere. So we made Evil's helmet in the spirit of Alien. Everything was dripping all the time in this set, oozing. And again, we're all covered with plastic. I don't know, again, we're preserving these people for later on, but then their lifespan is a bit short if you step out of line.
What did you say?
I love the fact that Evil is so tetchy, he's so arrogant on one hand, and yet anybody who dares suggest anything other than the way he sees it is a killer. Little touches like the explosion leaving the arm on the switch was important, because switches have to be thrown even if the body is no longer there.
Long before good, I made myself. I cannot be unmade. I am all-powerful.
David Warner, well, actually, strangely enough, again, Brazil keeps coming into the making of Time Bandits, because I originally wanted Jonathan Pryce to play Evil. But Jonathan took some other jobs which paid real money, and so we didn't get him. And when the idea of David doing it came out, it was fantastic, because, I mean, there's something about David that is so strange, and you're uncertain of who this guy is and what's going on there. He was perfect. He's got his voice, the quality is so disturbing and perfect, and to be able to say these lines, which are very silly lines, with that kind of menace is pretty special quality.
I'm David Warner, and I play the evil genius in Time Bandits. The script of Time Bandits arrived at my agent's office with an offer to play a role, the evil genius, and I read the script. And, well, it was something that I couldn't particularly visualize in my mind, but I knew from Terry's work on the television with the Pythons and his reputation that he was going to do something fantastic visually with this piece. As far as I was concerned as the evil genius, it gave me the opportunity of being playing the evil genius, but playing comedy, which is something that I've played before, but not many people knew me and know me for comedy. So I was able to have a bit of villainy, but that wonderful, delicious kind of villainy, absurd villainy.
No, I mean, because David is intense when he does his work. He's now Derek Deadman, who has been in several films. He was in Jabberwocky. He plays his sidekick here, and Derek is brilliant. I love the fact that Evil has surrounded himself with such stupid people, such incompetence, and yet he's insistent that he's the most powerful creature in the universe. But it's clear to everybody that it's a disaster.
Oh, thank you, Master. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think on some of the posters they said Wizard of Oz of the 80s, and I think what we're dealing with here, I mean, is very much like Wizard of Oz. I mean, I've always been influenced by that. Not only do we get the Wicked Witch of the West here, and this is exactly what the Wicked Witch used to see in a crystal ball, and we just made it flat. But also you get later on with the Supreme Being, it's like the Wizard of Oz also. When the dust settles, when the smoke and flames depart, you've got an ordinary guy.
Terry never mentioned the Wizard of Oz to me. If that was in his mind at all, I don't remember him ever saying that to me. I don't think he was trying to keep it a secret, but it was never a point of discussion at all. Any reference to any other film, really. As far as I know, everything was completely unique. Even, I've seen other movies with people looking into bowls of water and things like that to sort of see what's going on. I think even in the old Flash Gordons there was something going on like that. So it didn't occur to me that The Wizard of Oz was particularly influential.
What was bizarre about the film when we were about to distribute it and we were doing the trailers, and the marketing guy said, "You can't show these little guys. You can't show them." I said, "What do you mean you can't show them? They're the film. It's their film." He said, "No, people don't want to see that. They don't want to go to the movies and see little guys." Because what had happened, there had been, I think the film was called Under the Rainbow. It was about the making of Wizard of Oz with Chevy Chase playing the lead, and it was full of little guys, obviously. And the film was a disaster. So who gets the blame? Not the film, not Chevy Chase. It's the little guys that get the blame and decide the public don't want to see this. And it was a non-stop battle to get through this nonsense. We then went to Morocco, one of the things in the film to me are these big leaps, not just to different times, but to different textures and colors. And going from that messy place in the woods to this, and all the rain and the smoke, coming to this barren, dry place was important. We went to southern Morocco. We stayed in a town called Ouarzazate, but Ait Ben Haddou is the name of this place. Now, this is, in fact, the citadel on top of this mud town. It was like 130-degree heat. It was awful.
The best location was obviously Morocco, because it's just the most exotic, even though it was meant to be Greece, wasn't it? And I don't remember much about the travelling, actually. The funniest travel I do remember, though, was driving around the Moroccan mountains in a huge crew bus with everyone on it. And then Sean Connery behind in his own chauffeur-driven car, except everyone was convinced that his driver was just, completely drunk, because he was just all over the shop. And although he'd insisted on having his car, maybe for safety or just for, more personalised treatment, we just watched it behind the bus, just swaying all over the shop. So I'm sure he hasn't forgotten that either. Yeah, and the worst bit was a big party at the Club Mediterranean in Morocco, in Ouarzazate or Marrakesh, I'm not sure, and being asked to leave early because I was spoiling the party, because everyone wanted to have fun and strip off and jump in the pool, and they couldn't while this kid was wandering around. And I was really upset about that. I remember that.
Where have you come from? Huh?
I'm not quite sure.
Who sent you? The gods? Was it Zeus? Apollo?
And there's a great bit in the script where it says, and I remember reading that the mask is pulled off at the end of the fight to reveal none other than Sean Connery, or at least an actor of equal but cheaper stature. And then someone went out and played golf with him, and there he was.
Now, this was actually the very first days of shooting on the film, the very first day. And I had done elaborate storyboards. It was going to be, the big one. And I got out there, and suddenly it was clear we didn't have time to do it. And what was also interesting from Craig's point of view, this is the first film he'd ever been in, and suddenly he's dragged out of England, he's stuck on top of a steaming hot mountain, and he's playing opposite James Bond. Now, this was not Craig's finest hour, I'm going to have to admit here, because he was a bit intimidated that day. And Sean was very good, because Sean saw I was overambitious, Craig was hesitant, and he said, listen, shoot the kid first, and then I'll come back and do it later. And it was good, because he got me through it, because I wouldn't have done it. I would have sat there and done shot after shot after shot, and we would still be shooting there right now today. An interesting moment here is that Sean wouldn't allow me to shoot him getting on his horse, because he said, I'm not going to look good. I'm getting too old for that. And so all we got was him settling into the saddle, and he said, you work it out.
I was definitely aware of Sean Connery because of James Bond again, one of the ultimate fantasy figures. He was really, really friendly, really down to earth, yeah. And the riding off of the desert with him, I'm sure made more women jealous than the other kids. And I remember my mum saying that to him that he'd got the job because of his thighs.
The man holding the horn at the front end was Jim Atchison, the costume designer. This tower was a nightmare. It took us almost 3 months to get permission to go up on that tower, and we finally did it on the day because I positioned myself in front of the door and said, I'm not moving until we get in this tower.
And all these people, suddenly we're in Life of Brian world now. Just looking at them, I don't know what it is. But just looking at them, the costumes and the kind of just the quirkiness. But that was an amazing old place. That, because it's where it's where their temples had been, and just really, really old. And I very clearly remember the wailing in the hills from the kind of they lived in holes in the hills, or kind of little dugouts, and that was an amazing, amazing sound. Except, again, the terrible thing was that, a British film crew arrived and they just shut off the centre of their city, and people weren't allowed to come in or out. There was just traffic chaos and that, and they obviously paid for it. But I remember thinking at the time it was quite terrible because these people weren't allowed to come and watch or anything. It was just business, I guess. And again, the little relationship bits, like Agamemnon and his wife. I don't think she doesn't say a word in the whole thing, but you know exactly what the state of play is, and you know just the way she looks at him, and a couple of looks later on, and when he says that I'm to be his son, you know.
The problem in writing the scenes with Agamemnon and Kevin were that we were used to always being clever, and we would overwrite things. We would, you know, try to write clever lines, funny lines, interesting lines. And the reality was that it worked best by cutting everything out, because these kinds of relationships don't need much. They're implied. And Sean, when we first met him, when we started talking about this part, he said, I can do some magic tricks. And we incorporated it in, because I love the fact that Kevin wants to be taught how to kill Trojans, to sword fight, to do all the things boys like doing, killing and maiming. And the great hero who actually does do killings teaches him magic. And so we just turned everything on its head and discovered that the more we cut out of the dialogue, the more we cut out of the scene, the better it got. Because I don't know what more you need. You've got a great kid and a great hero. And doing a magic trick is fantastic. We let magic sort of float all through the Agamemnon sequence. It became part of the court. But to me, there was always this strange, just under the surface problem with his wife and things at home.
Kings aren't supposed to do things like that.
I mean, Terry's idea of the film was that it was a sort of child's dream view. And it was similar in a sense to the Python films in that the world, through the eyes of a child, is a pretty bizarre, absurd place where grown-ups do very strange things. What we were able to do here was present really a boy's book of heroes, and we were able to play them as such. That was their role in the film. They were to be heroes, whereas in Python I don't think we could have really played this Connery thing without a few, you know, laughs along the way, without a bit of debunking of the myth. Whereas here we can actually use the myth. The character of the boy was a fairly conventional boy in many ways. The house he comes from and what he reads and all that, except that in contrast to his parents, who are all on about sort of what gas cooker they're going to get next and are entirely sort of consumer preoccupied, he is still reading stories, and there is still this sort of feeling of imagination, which is really the key to the film. The film is celebrating a child's imagination and where it can take you, and the fact that it should be encouraged, because if you suppress the imagination, you end up like the parents sitting there in plastic sheeting, watching someone else do something for them on television. So the boy was very important, not to be, didn't want audiences to feel he was odd or quirky. He had to be sort of someone they could identify with. And not someone who would sort of dominate the world he was in, but take you through into these worlds and look at them in a kind of wonderment. But also someone who had a nice sort of way of talking to his heroes, the way he talks to Agamemnon and all that. But, you know, that there has to be an element there, to that in the boy, that he just can talk to his heroes and form a relationship with them very quickly. And that can be a convincing relationship, and then off they go somewhere else. So there's a lot of levels to work on. So it had to be an ordinary kid who is extraordinary, an ordinary kid who has extraordinary adventures, a very direct child who has a very vivid imagination. A lot of things going on there. I think Craig actually did it very well, sustained it very well, looked right and sounded right. And this is all just glorious stuff. The richness of the court scenes. And Terry Gilliam went to North Africa to shoot this, I think at Fez and around there. And it has the same sort of quality as some of the stuff we shot in Monastir in Tunisia for The Life of Brian. It's very convincing, sort of rather exotic, hard Mediterranean scenery that I think is really quite important to play against that, because it takes you off into a world that you don't know very well, that seems rather strange and wonderful and unfamiliar, and is not built at pine wood entirely. You know, it's actually, you can do wonderful exteriors which do look very bizarre, but that is the way the countryside is. And I think that especially in this story here, the story about Agamemnon and all that, is like the background to a child's dream, which was sort of something we wanted to keep going in every single one of these adventures in Time Bandits, was that they took place against a very striking and a very strong atmospheric background, whether it was dense woodland or parched, slightly sort of dry, barren desert, as in this one.
These are all moments I really enjoy, because it's again, it's all magic. The whole film becomes magical in that sense, because not only is it magical on one level, but it's magic tricks on another level. And I love Craig's reaction at that moment. It's like, oh no, it's one of his best reactions. I think it's wonderful. It's like, oh my God, they're back. Here he is, the most wonderful place that he's ever dreamed of, with a father that you could only, you couldn't dream of having a father as wonderful. And these guys are back. And this scene worked beautifully, because Sean is having a wonderful time. He's laughing, and Kevin is terrified of he knows what's going to happen somehow. And there's a real innocence about, there's an innocence about Sean that I like here. And the guys are just awful. Look at him. He's just... And the cheekiness of these guys is wonderful. We take his hat, we take everything, his crown. Sean's got the best set of teeth in the whole film, I think. Again, Sean's reaction at the end of this, I think, is great. When I get boom, and there's a moment of wonder and applause, and then we just hang on it longer. Nothing happens, and we're going to roll back, and nothing happens. And only on Laserdisc can you see his reaction. On video, it's not there. It works better on the big screen, period. Now our Titanic stuff, things like those, we only built this one set. We didn't have the funnels and the steam. It was stock footage we used. And in fact, later on, when the Titanic does sink, it actually is the footage from Night to Remember that had been colorized for the sinking of the Titanic. And then we got it from them, and we slowed it down further, so it had been colorized and slowed down by the time it makes Time Bandits.
And then the Titanic, of course, very well-known piece of history. And I wrote this again just because I think I wrote the two lovers in, and they said, oh, we've got to have them in a bit more. If you're going to be in this film, you've got to be in a bit more. So we wrote this scene where he's got another problem this time. And beautifully costumed, looks like the start of some Sandy Wilson musical. And chance for a bit of hammy, what we'd say in England, juvenile lead acting, as in lots of repertory companies up and down Britain, sort of actors like this, the same sort of hairstyle, looks like a sort of bathing cap. I think it was a wig on top of a bladder on top of my own hair, so it was about 7 decks of different scalp treatments there. Gosh, I look just like my father there.
Yeah. No shame. That's what I like about Mike. The guys were wonderful in their suits. Again, they're not being nice. They're not being charming. They're just being awful. They're talking about this, that, and demanding. What's sad is Tiny died eventually. It used to be interesting with Tiny when we would talk to him, and he was in Wales where he lived, and he'd have to bring a box with him to the public payphone because he didn't have a phone at home. So he'd take a box and stand there and call from the payphone. Jack Purvis has had a terrible accident. He was parking his car and his car backed up. He got caught between the car and the wall and has broken his neck. Mike and Malcolm and Kenny are still alive and kicking and well. So, and David's very funny in this scene when he comes over, because it was a scene that I actually found a bit difficult with him, because he was sort of playing like a theatrical actor. He's playing to the gods, and we had to do this a few times, trying to bring him down. I mean, that's the pity now. I mean, David committed suicide in Hollywood, which is a terribly sad thing, because he was having, by any standards, a good and successful career. But Hollywood has this thing of whatever you do, it's not good enough. There's always more. And David was incredibly intelligent. And I think it's difficult when you're really intelligent out there and somehow feel you're compromising, you're cheating, whatever is going on. And he killed himself.
I mean, we had those suits made at Savile Row, actually. He looks great. And we had one black suit and one white suit each. No, 2 white suits, because there had to be one dirty one and one clean one. And again, there's a brilliant line coming up, obvious but brilliant, at the end when he just says, "Oh, and plenty of ice." You know, that's just really sweet. Which is the kind of thing, again, the kids might miss, because they wouldn't, they wouldn't even necessarily heard of the Titanic or not clearly know what it was. And all these things, I'm sure, made it that, adults and kids and everyone loved it. Which sounds cliche, fun for all the family, but it really is that, because there's just so many levels going on. I really remember the smell of that cigar.
More champagne.
Yes, sir.
And plenty of ice.
More ice, please. Good line. This was hard when that thing tipped. We tipped the camera and pulled them, but it was actually dangerous, because these guys are not stuntmen, and when those chairs were on wires pulling, you get very nervous, because, on a regular film you can stunt double people, but there aren't stunt double for guys this size. And so they were like, precious beyond belief, because they had to do their own stunts. And we couldn't afford to let them get hurt. And we were always on edge about that. We were on the Pinewood tank. And it was actually very difficult, because, again, like Kenny can't swim. Most of the guys can't swim. And they're out there, and it's miserable. And they were generally frightened, but they did it. And that's why I was so bowled over by these guys, because whatever it took, they would do it, despite the fact that they were endangering themselves.
Now, Pinewood Tank is a huge arena of water with a really deep bit in the middle, which is, 40, 50 foot deep, maybe more, because that's where they film some of the James Bond things, like with submarines and that. And around the edges is the shallow bit, which is 3'6". And we were actually on a platform, because it was still too short for them. And I mean, this stuff, we were holding on to, you'll see everyone's right arms in the water, holding on to an underground wheel. I just remembered that. And of course, again, as a kid, that was I loved it, just swimming around, mucking around. And again, very physical for them, and there were a couple of complaints, I remember, about that.
Bring them into the time of legend.
I mean, this moment here of them transforming into the time of legends was interesting. We just use negative and solarize the stuff. I like the idea of them popping through into a different thing, where suddenly their black evening dress is now a white evening dress. It's just going through to the other side. And they all had to jump off towers into the water. And I think it was Craig being thrown in. I mean, Craig, we didn't care about Craig. He was easy. He could replace kids like that, so we'd throw him around. The boat, this waking scene of the hand waking up was actually from Jabberwocky, but I didn't get to shoot it because the actor in Jabberwocky who was supposed to be doing it refused to pick his nose with his hand, and so the scene was out. But Peter Vaughan, great actor, and turning him into an ogre was interesting. This is like Beauty and the Beast. I mean, this is not the Disney version. And what I liked about it is Catherine, who I wanted for this part originally, wasn't allowed to do the part because I was getting pressure from the studios that we wanted a movie star. She was a TV star. She was in soap at the time. But the people in the movie business had no regard for the people in television. They didn't count. So even though I wanted her, there was a lot of pressure to get a movie star. And this is all for getting the money in. And in the end, I got Ruth Gordon, who is wonderful. And she was on to do the thing. And at the last moment, she broke her leg in one of the Clint Eastwood movies, the ones with the orangutan. And so she couldn't do it, and I got Catherine, finally. And the extraordinary thing is when Catherine arrived in London, the driver taking her from the airport, every time he stopped at an intersection, people saw he was in the car, they would gather. And he said he'd never taken anyone around who got that treatment, that star treatment. And yet the studios didn't think she was a star. So she was fantastic. And I just loved Peter being this awful monster with all sorts of problems, spots and things. He's festering the whole time. And she's this beautiful, petite creature who's just deeply in love with him. In fact, loves his animal nature. That's what it's about. Oh, when he was really roar. And he's now become the middle-aged beast with nothing but middle-aged problems. And she's the real, the backbone of the family. She's the one with real steel. So when they capture the gang, she's the one that's preparing the spikes to impale them upon. He's the softy. She's grinding up foot powder there from feet.
What's in there?
I don't know. It's not prawn.
Again, when you put the right people together with Catherine and Peter, they immediately responded to each other. And between the two of them, this sexiness started to develop. Because we just wrote them as funny characters. You could see maybe Terry Jones playing the wife and Mike playing the other. They were like Python characters. But again, with Catherine and Peter, they became real people with real sexual drives and all that underplay through all this whole thing.
Terrify them.
It was hard work, because the late nights and things, I suppose, when they were completely contravening any child regulations that they'd heard of. But I can never remember actually not wanting to be there or being upset because I was tired or anything, really. I'm sure I did get tired sometimes, or getting up early, the next day and carrying on. But no, I never remember. That's what I was saying. I'm sure it was a lot harder work for everyone else because they were doing their job and having a fancy trip, and I was just having fun, really. And it was a very happy crew. And I can remember one time only on the set of the Ogre's ship when Terry lost his rag just once, and he just shouted at the set for about 5 minutes because people were being slack or things weren't going well. But again, as the boss, you've got to do that to show everyone what's going on. And I remember Peter Vaughan he was one person actually who was rude to me once because he I can't remember, it was something like I say about his back when he pulls me off. He pulls out Kenny Baker first, and then he pulls me out, and I just remember he just said I said, do I say that first or do you? And he just said something like, well, you should know, shouldn't you, or something like that. And that was just the one thing that to a kid, because you're not used to that. But then that's fair enough. It's a professional job. I mean. But that was funny, because there's one person that just stands out. Maybe you didn't like kids. He's a good ogre, though.
That's better! That's better! That's wonderful!
The boat, it actually came from a drawing, or I was working backwards from this. Brian Froud, who's a great artist, somewhere in one of the books he did had a boat on a head of somebody in the water, and so I liked the idea of a boat being on this giant's head. And working backwards, I started working on this boat, and I drew it, and I went into the art department, and they were going crazy designing thing in a very elaborate, proper way, and it was making me madder and madder. And so I went home and out of clay built the boat. I said, that's the boat. I don't want to see all these drawings. That's the boat. Give it to the carpenters and let them make it and fake it rather than sitting down. One of the problems when you're making films is there's art departments that love making working drawings, and I sometimes think they get in the way of this kind of rough and raw boat.
You've got to stop them, Winston!
I can cough! At last I can really cough!
As far as the exterior of the boat, again, that was on the tank, and it couldn't move. I mean, as the boat set sails here, this is the camera moving, nothing's going on. I mean, again, it's that something's got to move, and if the boat can't, we do it with the camera. These guys, again, Jack was amazing. Jack would climb up that rigging, and I kept saying, you sure you can do this? There was no end to what they would try. Again, boat still, we're on the camera on a crane, wiggling it around, trying to make some sense, some feeling of movement. Again, you're blowing the smoke. This, again, the boat hasn't moved here. We've done it on the camera and with the guys acting.
And Og's actually quite resourceful for being the dumb one. He leaps into action there, and when they get out of the cage at the end, he's the one who picks the lot. And apparently he was a good designer of shrubs and trees in his career. But it's just nice to get, you get the overall picture. No, not one person is taken for granted, really.
The tricky thing with water, I mean, we're working at such a scale. Normally, if you do boats in the water, you use a boat that's 15 foot long, something so you've got a chance with the scale of the water, because it's the hardest thing. Water doesn't behave. It doesn't reduce itself very easily. So you put in lots of stuff to actually try to break up the surface tension of the water. You put chemicals in the water. And the special effects guys did a nice thing with the giant, because they had a little ring around the front of his chin, which they were pumping out condensed milk, which gives the white froth. And it helps the scale enormously. Then we built this little mini set here. It's a strange scene. I'm not sure about it. I always wanted to do this scene with a group of trolls. Families are constantly working their way into this film. And this huge giant marching forward. And they're busy in a domestic squabble, paying no attention to this natural disaster that's about to confront them. And unfortunately, the trolls are so small, you don't really get to see the detail of them. They're very funny creatures. And we built just this miniature set, and then months later shot them against a full-size set, which was in combined, which you can see doesn't quite move the same. Yeah, now one of the things we discovered about the giant is when I was casting for a giant, I was bringing in very tall men and using a very wide-angle lens down at their feet made them look like bean poles. They had no weight. So we ended up, in the end, getting a wrestler who was very short, but he was as wide as he was tall. And with the lens down there, he looked fantastic. Then we had him walking. In fact, he was almost running, because we were shooting this at 4 times normal speed, which then, when slowed down, gets all of his muscles. I mean, the mass and the weight of those muscles is fantastic. Then we built this false scalp under the set. And again, this is one of the insidious scenes where a kid introduces drugs into what would normally be a fairy tale, and the idea of using bellows to inject sleeping potion into the giant's skull always made me laugh. And I'm sure a lot of parents were very disturbed by this. But we're living in the modern world. We can't turn our backs on these things. It always hurts when I see this happen. Craig's great, really slamming it in there. No, when the inside of the thing, we could tip the boat a bit, but not as much as you see. So it was always a combination of the set tipping and the camera tipping the opposite direction to make it even greater. But that's what's interesting about the Giant. There's no real special effects going on there. It's just literally a camera in the right place, going at the right speed with the right guy, and it's very easy. We build a miniature set, and a lot of it's done with sound effects. The sound effects are really important in all of this because they just give you the scale and the weight. When I look around at what is it, Thief of Baghdad, and the Giant there, the genie, he's not as big as this at all. There's something about Ian, who we used. He's so massive. And again, very slow and heavy.
What's happening?
We were just beginning to learn to do some of our special effects. Again, it's Kent Houston at Peerless, who has been my partner for years. And it's very small, unlike ILM, it's like, 6, 7 people working there. And so a lot of our blue screen effects, which we did here for the first time, they're okay. I mean, you see a bit of the Giant. I think I could have done that better now, looking back, and we could have done a tilt down. We could have seen more of the Giant and found them, but we weren't able to do that then. So everything is very crude and very basic.
So this next bit, we're in Dungeness now, in South England, which was an amazing place because it is. There's a point you can go to, and it's just pebbles for what looks like all the way around. And they had an eight-wheel little plastic buggy that went in the water as well as just over anything, and that was really good fun. Again, just one of the perks, just being around these interesting things. But everyone knows it's an extraordinary thing that they're involved in, really, in the scheme of things. Especially, it's got to be said, in fantasy films and that, because of the setting you're in, it's just ludicrous sometimes.
Now, what's also interesting about this scene is because in the course of the making of the film, there was a bit of a division between the gang, or the rest of the gang, and David Rappaport, because David was actually, he felt he got the job because he was a great actor, not because he was a great 4-foot actor. Now, there's a subtle difference there. And he always kept himself separate from the rest. And there was a certain antagonism that was building up within the group, which was very good because it was really what the characters were about. And so we wrote this scene, which gave the gang a chance to attack David and him to fight back. And it's an ugly scene. And I really liked it because they came alive, and all of the frustrations they'd felt in the making of it came out in this scene. Jack really came into his own in this scene. Jack is really strong and powerful as an actor. And this kind of ugly pushing worked a treat. The invisible barrier was interesting because we did, for the wide shots, everybody was just miming hitting this thing, and we put the sound effects on afterwards. And then the close shots, of course, we did have a piece of glass that they pushed up against. When we broke it, again, we had a sheet of glass there, but then we had tons of other pieces that we then had to dump down from above to give the sense that it went on for a great height. It was a cold, miserable grey day when we went down to do this, and again, which was absolutely right for the scene. It's bleak and barren.
We have found it.
And then we just cut out of Perspex a piece here and left it, and off we go. Now, the model that we built for the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness was all out of polystyrene, and it was probably about 12 feet high and about 25 feet across, because it was the width of the thing that you could see more of. It was laying flat. And we made a fatal mistake. We painted it too dark because we wanted it to be this black thing. But by painting it dark like that, we needed more light to get the depth of field, because the things in the foreground are in focus and the things in the distance are in focus. The models always give that away. So we needed a lot of light, which unfortunately kept melting and distorting this thing. But in the end, it worked. And little characters, when they're going across the bridge, are just tiny, tiny little figures that are being pulled with magnets on their feet, that are being pulled from underneath. We then went into a set that isn't really a set. There's nothing here except black velvet. It gets interesting when you just put in a bit of flooring and then you let everything go black and becomes this total limbo space.
Yes, folks. Moderna Designs present the latest in kitchen luxury.
We built a model for the labyrinth there. And then we shot the guys later over in Shepperton Studios, and we just laid out a path on the ground that they had to run.
So then we enter into yet another world, which is the actual fortress itself. And the maze that they're running around, you know, again, I saw the model, but the actual running around bit was done on 1 or 2 blocks, really, just different angles and different running around bits. But this is where the zany, you know, the zany kind of Python thing really kicks in, because it's built up to all this thing, ogres and giants and the actual fortress. And then when they finally get in there, you know, the thing that they've is the most fabulous thing is this flaming kitchen, you know, from 70s suburban England. And they go for it, they love it, you know. What would any of them do with a kitchen? but they know, they've been told, you know, it's a brilliant, it really is clever ideas.
But before they collect their prize, let's just have a look at what made it possible for them to be here with us tonight.
That lens is a bit strange, the wide-angle lens, and we know something bad is about to happen. Fingers, and we're there. It's very simple. No special effects. Everything is pretty much done just straight and done with cuts and in the camera. And we did have a problem with David. We had to double him because David has vertigo and could never make this walk.
Some of the angles I can see, he shoots me from down below. Not only is it supposed to be sinister, but there's those huge nostrils.
This sequence, the cage sequence, was literally, I think, about half a page in the script. And we only had it scheduled for a day or so to do it. And we started doing it, and it got better and better, and we shot it for a considerable length of time. It was like a week in the end. What we did, we were, again, in a small stage, and we had one full-size cage, and we had a half-size, or a two-thirds size cage, and then a quarter-size cage. So the distance between all those cages is probably only, from the front one to the back one, is only 40 feet. But, you know, playing with scale like that works.
And this is a clever bit. That's detective work, really. So you can actually see the map in the photo and use it. It's all clever thinking. And then they're a good team. You know, they spring into action. Suddenly, just complete depression to complete. You know, right, we're going to do this.
What I liked about this, Ray Cooper did the music behind this scene, and it's all percussive. And with sound effects, we seem to have created a huge space. It's much bigger than it really is. And I find it interesting when you put a lot of blackness in there, you put the right sounds on it, people's imagination goes to work and does all the work for you. And Ray doing the music was quite interesting because he's, you know, this extraordinary percussionist who brought in his whole kit of drums and cymbals and things. And watching him work, he did it all to picture, and it wasn't written, it was performed, and it was quite extraordinary. There was one point, he was on one set of drums, and I realized he wanted to get to this cymbal at the other side of this, or a gong, it was a big gong, at the opposite side of the stage, and there was no way he'd get there in the time that he had. Suddenly he leapt, like in a kung fu film, flew across the stage, and with his Dr. Martens boots, smashed the gong right on cue. It was brilliant. But this was great. There was something about this once we got in there, and it was the way things moved. And I thought, now let's just do a proper adventure film here. This is The Escape from Alcatraz. This is, you know, Top Copy. This is any of those kinds of films. And we just kept building it and building it. And it's one of my favorite scenes because I think the tension in it works, everything works well. I love them all weaving away. There's something, the idea of cutting the very thing that's supporting you to make the rope that's going to hopefully let you escape is wonderful. The swinging of Strutter, I'm very pleased with the way it worked because, again, we're only about 10 feet off the ground here. It's just black velvets on the ground. And so at this point we change it, but it's using very wide angle lenses to create the sense of great space. And then what works is just the way the guys strain with the ropes, is you really feel weight. When they started trying to swing it, we did that, again, that's in slow motion, we overcranked it. And so everybody was working faster than normal, but it's just trying to get it going. Because these things are about, because we all know what it's like to move something, how much things weigh. And to get that on film really pleased me, the sense of just how hard it is to do what they're doing. Now that part is a model attached to it. Oh, Malcolm was having a good time. Whoa, and he gets it. Now this cage we actually had at an angle. It's not really hanging straight down, so he's sort of holding it. It was about 45 degrees. And we then tipped the camera. And Jack goes, details, swing, and two, and boom. Same thing. It's the same cage that Malcolm was on without the skeleton, and Malcolm lets go of his, slides. Now there's a moment here that's breathtaking, which is this. And it's a model shot, and it was shot backwards. And we had a little model, which is about 6 feet tall. And literally, it's held, somebody with his fingers are holding its little arms until we pull it backwards. And one take, it did that. And everything works like a human being. It reaches for it and grabs. And you shoot a lot of these things hoping one of them is going to work. And we were very lucky to get that shot.
And then there's a very physical bit coming up, which is the hanging off ropes. There's a big studio, 3 cages. And harnesses, body harnesses. And I remember swinging around on those. That was good fun.
Wally's wonderful, Mr. Show-Off. Yeah, it was physically hard, but it's nothing like what it appears to be. That's what's so funny. We're only a few feet off the ground all the time. And this bit of the labyrinth set is nothing. It's not a big section. I think each side of that is probably only about 12 feet. Maybe 10 feet. But it was, again, using very wide-angle lenses and putting the camera hopefully in the right place.
Well, we've done it. Yeah, we've done it.
No, we need is a map.
Them being sensible guys, get out of there. And Kevin, such a liberal little wet, trying to save the world. What a fool. Anybody in their right mind would just forget about the world. Get on with it. This character, no, he's a little goody two-shoes. He's got to go in there and try to get the map and save the universe. We built this whole wall out of there's skulls everywhere in this place.
Well, I mean, approaching a part like this, there's no deep inner... I don't sort of dig into the deep wells of any kind of particular psyche. I mean, for me, it was pure fun, the whole idea of having this pomposity. I mean, for me, that's what it was, too. Obviously, to a certain age group, the whole visuals there are very, very scary, but I tried not to be. I tried not to be scary. I tried to make him human and silly. I mean, the whole idea of him really looking sinister. I mean, I never think of this man as being really sinister. And for the life of me, apart from what he says and his capability of zapping people, he's the most unevil-looking creature I've ever seen, to be quite honest with you. I don't think he really looks evil.
The character David Warner plays, the evil genius, apart from the fact that David really made the character his own, what we provided, and I think the idea behind the character was someone who had sort of a love of modern technology, which he didn't quite understand, but he loved all the potential of it. And the theme of sort of technology not working goes throughout the film, and at the very beginning it's all about gadgets you can have in the home and all that. They're always watching television. So it's a sort of version of a flawed modern world where technology will take over. And I think that both Terry and I feel about technology is that there are wonderful things which it can achieve, but that it does tend to depersonalize people. If you're not very careful, the more we rely on machines, the less we have to talk to each other, the less we have to try and understand each other, the less we have to put up with people whose views are very different to our own. So you get a sort of technical blandness to the whole thing, which we were sort of playing on in some of the characters in this film, especially the parents, and in some ways, you know, with the evil genius.
First of all, I couldn't visualize what the evil genius was going to look like. And that, of course, is a kind of story in itself, the costume and everything. I mean, I arrived there and put on the robe, which is this long robe, just a basic robe, and a kind of skull cap. We went into what looked like a garage with all sorts of bits of lead piping and things and wires and things. And Terry really, you know, would pick something up and say, how about putting that on top of the head, or this there, and we'll put that there, and then the idea of long fingernails. And it kind of evolved as we were sitting there and talking. I mean, from my memory, there was no definitive sketch of how the evil genius would look like when I arrived at the costume fitting. And Terry literally kind of put it together and experimented with it. It was always going to be a big thing, a bizarre look. There was nothing that had to be changed because it was always going to be a lumbering, uncomfortable piece of work. No, I don't think anything had to be changed, except adaptation of those fingernails for bathroom breaks, which we won't go into.
Yeah, turning Og into pig. I've still got that pig head at home. Val Charlton made that. And again, it's very simple. It doesn't do much. It isn't heavily animatronic. Its ears work. Its snout moves. We then built this set out of Lego, and giant Lego, and we just kept filling it full of smoke and shooting it in different angles. But it wasn't that big a set. We had 2 stages at Lee's Studios, which we could open the door between the two, and so we ended up, it's about 120 feet by 80 feet. It is elaborate stuff, but it's done with little people and wide-angle lenses and just careful lighting. So, you know, we're always leaving things into darkness that hopefully imply there's more out there. Well, one of the ways we work is I've always liked working in smaller spaces than we need. And everybody screams and shouts, but what it does do is limit what you can build, because nature abhors a vacuum. And if you have a big stage, you build bigger sets, no matter what the budget says. We made Time Bandits for $5 million is what it was made for. And again, that's nothing.
Well done, Og.
Yes, Og and Mill's face. Ready?
Yeah, I don't understand these creatures. I mean, I designed them, and I have no idea what they're about. I just love cows' heads, but then I like them being way up in the air like that, and then put these sort of lobster claw on them. They make no sense to me at all. I think this is the moment when you realize, oh, those are Lego blocks.
Orson Welles, as many of us know, called cinema the ribbon of dreams. And Terry's dreams, and also his nightmares. He's one of the wonderful and few directors who can actually put his dreams and nightmares actually onto celluloid. so you can see images involving people. We're not now talking about animation or cartoon effects or anything. Using people and things, which are just absolutely fantastic. If you think of Munchausen, for example, or whatever, which was, of course, created before Terry Gilliam, but he took his own, he can put his imagination onto celluloid for us to see, like nobody else that I have ever seen, which is a really fantastic quality. It's a fantastic thing to be able to do.
Well, this is like Evil's desire to learn about technology, obviously, is where real power lies, but he's so inept at it, is what's funny. So we know technology is potentially dangerous. Basically, technology is dangerous in the wrong hands, is what it's about. And he definitely has got the wrong hands. I mean, how can you use push-button phones with fingernails like that? He's not really equipped to deal with technology, even though it fascinates him. And he does certainly have control over it. What children's film blows up a dog? This is a big question.
I'm a reasonable man. Give me the map, and you might at least walk out of here on human feet.
It was very interesting with the pig man who had the trained pig, because this guy came in claiming this pig could do any number of wonderful things. And the pig just never did it. But the guy was convinced the pig was doing it all the time. And I think there's a lot of mad people associated with films, and people who train animals sometimes are the maddest. What was interesting about our tank, now I just saw this in a film fairly recently, somebody did this. There's a lot of stuff stolen from our film here. The problem with the tank, it's got a wobbly barrel, which may be crazy, but also the tank didn't work. It was built on I think a Land Rover chassis, and when we actually started doing some of this sequence, it broke down and wouldn't work. And so we had to shoot this battle sequence out of sequence, and luckily I storyboarded it. The crew thought I was mad, because I would each day, depending on what disaster was facing us, I'd say, we'll do this shot, that shot, that shot, and they said, this isn't going to work. And I said, trust me, I've worked it all out. And in the end, one of the nicest things was at the premiere, focus puller came up and said, we thought you were crazy, Terry, but it all just cut together. But a lot of the movements of the tank later on are all guys pushing it, because the Land Rover had broken down.
This was my favourite set of the whole thing, definitely, because it was based on my bedroom, you know, Kevin's bedroom. But I used to play around there quite a lot, because I was, you know, as a kid, just still mucking around and all, we're everywhere, really, just like a kid does. And there are lots of boxes, the cardboard boxes with mattresses on for the stunt people to fall on. And I remember, like, one afternoon just jumping from about 20 feet up onto these things. And I'm sure if you know, any of the people see me, they'd have been really pissed off about it, because it's, you know, it's their investment, jumping up and down.
That was a mixture, of course, of myself and models and things like that. That's a very slow technical process. I mean, it works very quickly on the, you know, on the screen and in the sequence, but that would be one of the longest and slowest processes, intercutting between a model of myself spinning and then, you know, shot of my face. That's so chopped up that there's no, in the shooting, that's so chopped up for me as an actor that there's no real memory I have of it. I wouldn't have known exactly what Terry had in mind there. Get into this, and you're going to turn around now, and we're going to put the model in now, and you stand there now, please, and we're going to wrap some ropes around you, but you don't know until you see it exactly what's happening. So it's like for you, you're a member of the audience for the first time when you see the finished product, which is always a thrill.
It's all done in quick cuts. I mean, he swings his cape. We cut back to the archers, and we got a pincushion. A lot of people didn't recognize it as a pincushion, I think, at first. So they have to watch the film again and again, and eventually buy the laser discs so they can see what really was intended. These films are designed so ultimately the Voyager company does well, because it requires hundreds of viewings of the films before you really appreciate them.
And this is the ultimate kids', you know, bedroom, really, because it's just all these toys, cowboys, knights, a spaceship and a tank. I mean, it's just a perfect setup on a kind of chessboard. And, you know, if you're kneeling down playing with them, this is the kind of thing you'd play with them for.
That gas mask, always like World War One or Two, is always in my mind. The knights crashing in there. Again, it was very hard to get enough movement on this stage. You get a horse up to speed, charge them in, charge them out, and Malcolm coming out of the dust. When I look at this now, some of the strong shots are almost theatrical in their simplicity. It's like a cartoon. They just have very basic information in them. A lot of smoke, a lot of dust, a lot of blackness. And I think it makes it look really strong. David. No, we're pushing that at the moment, and the guy's having to turn the wheels to make it look like it's moving. In fact, the wheels move at a slightly different, or the treads move at a slightly different pace than the machine, if you look closely.
Terry was very sensitive to everybody's discomfort, but the way he presented himself made one really want to go out of one's way and not care about the discomfort to get what he wanted, because Terry has such a wonderful way of asking you to do the impossible, and you come up with your own ways of making it possible. And that's a reflection on Terry and the way he deals with his actors. Because you would think from something like this that it is purely visual and effects and things like and that kind of thing. Especially, I mean, this is, 20 years ago, we're talking... this is a long time ago. Today, a lot of directors, or many directors that I've worked with, really don't concentrate at all on the actors and their sensibilities, because to them it's purely visuals. And certain directors just would not know how to deal with the actors, and would just expect them, like cartoons, to do whatever is required.
Real, the pig, that was his finest moment, wasn't it? He backed off. That was probably trick number 99. I don't know what the other 98 were. They all look the same. Oh, that's it. We killed the nicest one. We killed the cuddly Time Bandit, because Kenny was always the one the kids liked. I mean, there's Kenny's sweet and funny and outrageous. So let's kill him. And also, he was Jack's partner. And I as the film was developing, I could see Jack was really getting to be a better and better actor. So I thought it would give Jack a chance to do this scene and really go wild. And he does it. And he was really strong and really, really frightening.
Get down, Wally! Get down! Get out!
I always thought after making Time Bandits that if I had, which it doesn't really worry me one way or the other, had won some kind of award for that role as the evil genius, I would really legitimately been able to say, and thank you to the little people. Working with Craig was pretty simple. If there was any kind of problem, him being young or inexperienced, it certainly didn't show itself on the set, as far as I was concerned. So I had no problem. To me, he was a young actor. I've worked with some children, and they're not experienced, and they're not so professional. I don't have one moment that I didn't feel that he was in total control of what he was doing. You know, very professional, even if he'd never done anything before. So I never had a problem there.
But this has got to be one of the funniest bits. So the Godhead's been following us the whole way through, and you know, it's just big in the voice, all the huge echoes on and things, and then suddenly, you know, Sir Ralphie steps out in a suit, as English as anyone could ever be, ever.
Ralph Richardson, there you go, Sir Rafe. Getting him to be in the film was an interesting thing because he interviews his directors, he tests them. I had to go to his house on a Sunday morning, and it's a beautiful Nash Terrace house in Regent's Park. And you go up there, and we sit down and we start talking about the film. And he makes it hard work for you. And he makes it harder work because he was plying me with gin and tonic. This is on a Sunday morning. I don't drink much anyway, and he's pouring alcohol down me. And I realize this is a test. He's going to try to get me drunk and see what happens. And I've got to keep speaking intelligently through the whole course of this thing. And he's bringing up this, he's bringing up that. He's got ideas. He wants to play God in a light linen suit, a blue linen suit, and a Panama hat. And I suddenly realized I know what he's talking about, because there was a play that Charles Wood wrote, which was about the making of Charge of the Light Brigade, which he was in. And I know he wore a suit like that in that play. And so it was obviously a comfortable suit and a light suit, and he'd feel nice in it. And he said, you know, God's in a very hot place, obviously high up, close to the sun. And I said, no, I sort of see him as a headmaster, a fussy kind of guy. And he was going on and on about the suit. At each point, I had to match him. I had to keep up with him while I'm downing my gins. And this is hard work. And it ended up, I think I did well, because by the end I was still coherent, and he was doing impersonations of Little Titch, who was an old music hall performer. I think I got him, but I hadn't won on the suit yet. And this suit was important, and one day he came to lunch at the studio while we were shooting, and he was wearing the suit you see in the film. And we sat there all through lunch, and I know he wanted me to talk about the suit, and I refused to talk about the suit. We had about a couple hours together talking about everything but the suit. And it was only as he was saying goodbye, I said, what do you think of this? Do you think this would work? I said, yeah, perfect. And that was the end of it. And so then we start working on the script, and he's very good. We'd have sessions. We'd go up to his room, and he would, God's lines, he'd underline his in reds, and he'd say, God wouldn't say that. I said, oh, right, okay, God wouldn't say that. And if I couldn't argue him out of it, I had to agree, God wouldn't say that. And he seemed to know what God would or wouldn't say. And what was interesting, once he established his power over the entire unit, including the director, he was wonderful. And by the second day, the shoot was wonderful, because he was sitting next to with the Sparks looking at porno magazines, and I thought, it's all fine and dandy.
I remember the day he came in, because I did go down to the set that day. And Terry's usually... I mean, Terry's a good director in the sense he's absolutely in control, knows exactly what shots he wants to get, but rarely shouts or gets angry with people. That's not his way of doing it. But he keeps things bustling along. But the day that Ralph Richardson came in was... to play God, was like having God on the set, because this great man who was one of the most revered English actors, and so any idea Sir Ralph Richardson came up with, we were sort of forced to discuss it and consider it. And he had a lot of ideas about, I think this post box should be over here, dear boy. Oh yes, Sir Ralph. So the scene is very much as Sir Ralph wanted it, and I realised that the price you pay for having great performances like that is you do have to sacrifice the script as it is in many ways, and for a short cameo like that, let them invent things and create things. But we were awed. We were awed when Sir Ralph turned up.
The idea of the post box was his idea. He felt that was the place where evil ought to be put. I don't know why. But it's a nice kind of thing you would have. I think he was remembering things he played with when he was a kid. I think one of the things about this movie, it allowed people to bring their own experiences of childhood into it at every stage. Now, I mean, this is the moment coming up here, which is now all shot in reverse, because the only way we could make the rising smoke was to dump it, dry ice, from above. This shot is going forward. Smoke from the ground is coming up, but it didn't look right. And then we put, coming up here, coming up, folks, that's all shot in reverse, that shot. This is shot in reverse. That's shot in reverse. All of that is in reverse. And I thought, what a wonderful way for the great Ralph Richardson to end his days on Time Bandits. The yellow smoke was important. Again, when we get into the room here and the firemen come in, that was shot at the beginning. So the firemen that come in is not Sean Connery. These were just firemen that came in. And it was only later that we turned it into Sean. I do a bad impersonation of Sean. saying, "Come on," or something. His voice as we grabbed him and take him out. We thought it was confused enough that nobody'd ever know. And we still have a double. We still don't have Sean. That's not Sean. Yeah, because all this was shot about a month after we shot the scene, the 2 shots with Sean. This is one of the 2 shots, which was shot in the back of the studio. And he now takes the hose and walks out of shot. And somebody else takes over.
If you'd been half a man, you'd have gone in there after the blender.
And the parents, see, this is very important at the end of the film when they find that piece of burnt evil in there, because parents have to listen to their children, and they don't. And so they die, which is only right in a children's film. That's what the kids liked. That's what the parents were frightened of. I remember at an early screening of the film, and this is a turning point, was when we came out afterwards and we asked the kids what did they think. And first little kid came out and they said, "What's your favorite part of the film?" "Oh, when the parents get blown up." And that was rather crucial. What was interesting was the little boys seemed to like that. Little girls had a problem. They said, "Well, who's going to look after him?" And little boys knew they didn't need looking after. And I like the fact that Sean then just goes, he's out there. It's like a guardian angel. He's going to be out there somewhere. He's going to be when the kid needs him. But there was, to me, always this aspect of a kid growing up, and now he's on his own, having gone through that adventure. He's now on his own. In this last shot, as Kevin walks towards the smoldering piles of parents, we couldn't make the cherry picker go smoothly up in the air. So we had to do it in reverse. It descended well. And so that shot is shot in reverse, which is much more interesting, I think, than it would have been the other way around. The hands here, God's hands, were played by Ray Cooper. And Ray was the head of production at Handmade Films, which we just set up. And he had been producing George Harrison's records. And the idea was that Ray would come on the film and somehow convince me to put George's music all over the film. Because Dennis O'Brien, George's manager and the executive producer, saw this film as kind of a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with a lot of hi-ho, it's off to work we go music on it. And Ray and I had our first meeting, and the one thing we agreed on immediately was that that was not the way to go. Well, having Ray Cooper and myself effectively keeping George's music out of the body of the film, George wanted to write a song for the end, which I thought was great. I really liked it. And it's an interesting set of lyrics, because it was only later that I discovered the lyrics were meant for me. They're his notes about the film and about me. If you listen to them, it's, I can't remember how they go, but it's things like, to amaze or astound without taking up time. He felt that this film was too long. And he was angry because he felt I was being a bit pig-headed about dealing with Dennis O'Brien. I wasn't grateful enough, and I was shouting and behaving badly. So you'll see lines in there referring to that. It's very interesting. I didn't know this until it was all over and the film was done and out, before somebody said, I think it was Ray Cooper, said, "Those were meant for you." This is my big problem about kids' movies, that Grimm's fairy tales served us well for many, many years, and modern education advisors, modern parents are frightened of frightening their kids. And to me, the whole point of fairy tales is to frighten the kid, and because at the end, it ends up with happy endings normally. And the kids come out having gone through these nightmare situations, these terrifying things, and they come out, and they made it. And it's like exercise for life, for all the dangers that are going to be confronting them, all the complicated situations will be confronting him. You take that away from a kid, and you end up with kids that aren't prepared for life. And to me, that's always been what fairy tales are about. They're not about beautiful, romantic finding. They're about danger and fearful situations.
Yeah, well, I've been in therapy for years and years now. You know, just trying to sort out the good and evil in my head, and like, you know. And I don't know, sometimes I just lose it. And this is what they put it down to. So I remember these names. A lot of it's nice. It's even nice to see the names up again. But yeah, well, there's being asked about it by people, and people. It is the favourite film of so many people. It really is. And you know, and I've actually been in a room when people are talking about films and that, and they've said, "Well, actually, my favourite film is," you know, and it's like, "Oh God," and then someone else goes, "Oh, you're not going to believe this," but you know, and I get that a lot. And I've also had, you know, people drunk out of their minds coming up to me in pubs and doing the same thing. But that's cool. It's an interesting thing for people. You know what I mean? It's like just a little bit out of the ordinary. And again, it was just such a special, you know, magical film. But no, I really have been living in fantasy ever since.